grandson of Labor icon Cesar Chavez has a warning for America and its voting rights battle as organizers prepared for the multicity March on for Voting Rights on Saturday, the anniversary of 1963's March on Washington. Much of the focus has been on the main event in the nation's capital. There, Martin Luther King III will rally demonstrators much like his dad did 58 years prior, when he told 250,000 people on the National Mall, "I have a dream." Alejandro Chavez will be in Phoenix, another city hosting flagship events. Those fighting for voting rights in Arizona will join congregants of Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church, a predominantly black church that will celebrate its centennial next year. Your grandfather is a hero of the labor movement, but he got started with mentors Fred Ross and Father Donald McDonnell organizing voting drives. Tell us about this aspect of your granddad's legacy. My grandfather was very committed to his faith. He wrote, "Prayer of the farm worker's struggle." The first line starts, "Show me the suffering of the most miserable, so I will know my people's plight." The last lines are, "Help us love even those who hate us, so we can change the world." And that's just the way he started every meeting, every meal, every wedding, every birthday, every event. Ultimately, his thing was that you had faith. What's having more faith than organizing and registering voters and taking what you believe to the people? What do you need more than 100% faith that it can be done? Most people don't realize it doesn't happen without those two separately coming into his life and then him finding a point where they meet. In Fred Ross' writings, there's a note on when he met my grandfather. It says, "I think I've found the guy I've been looking for." What are some of the obstacles to voting unique to Latinos and Hispanics today? IDs are a great one. My legal name on paper is Alejandro Cesario Reyes Chavez, for solid names. My birth certificate didn't have room for two middle names, so they had to hyphenate it. Well, over the years, I've got it finally corrected, but it used to be, am I Alejandro Chavez? Am I Alejandro Cesario? Am I Alejandro Cesario Chavez? Which one's the last name? And so voting was always a challenge. I'd have to vote provisional and then go to the county. That's a big thing, I think, happens a lot in Latino communities. We give 4 names, sometimes 5. 2 is people have different forms of ID. Some people don't drive, so a driver's license isn't it. Depending on where you are, you may not drive. If you look in New York, for example, who drives in New York City? Imagine being an immigrant in that town, trying to get an ID to just vote when you don't drive. Then the vote by mail is huge because when you're in the field, you're out on a job site, it's not easy to ask your foreperson, "Hey, can I go vote?" Yes, by law, you are granted it, but we're talking about the realities of employers. It's hard to vote at the polls when you go to work at 4 a.m. and then you get off at 5:30 p.m. and the polls close at 6. August 28th is the anniversary of the "I Have a Dream" speech. King once wrote your father, praising his devotion, his fasting for farm workers' rights. He wrote, "The plight of your people and ours is so grave that we all desperately need the inspiring example and effective leadership you have given." What did the telegram mean to your grandfather? It meant a lot, and in later writings, you'll see he talks about how the farm worker movement derived its power, its ability to participate non-violently, its drive from Dr. King, the civil rights and the black movement at the time. People actually probably don't know Coretta Scott King was a huge supporter of my grandfather. She came out before he broke his fast in Phoenix in 1972, where the phrase, "Sigh, seppued," was first kind of coined, and other times. That telegram was the handshake reached out, and while they were never physically able to, I think they tried spiritually in many ways. That's why I feel this August 28th event is such a big deal. Martin relayed to me similar sentiments. His father was always a reverend. He was always checking if they were doing their Bible studies. They were always having lessons. It reminds me that while these men were so great in civil rights and in labor, they actually started as organizers. They started as a voter registrars. They started out as a person that got people civically engaged. So, voting rights is essential to that very line you say. Our movements have always been one, is essentially even more important now, and it's going to take the leadership of you and yours to bring us all together. That's what we're trying to do. Your grandfather was studious, and one person he admired was John Lewis, one of the reasons the marches are happening Saturday. Give us a sense of what Lewis and the Voting Rights Act meant to your grandfather. I never got a chance to talk to my grandfather about John Lewis. I was about 15 when he passed away. But I will share a story, and it's kind of the flip side. During one of the elections in 2014, John Lewis came to Arizona to work for different candidates. I was working, and my wife says, "Hey, John Lewis is here. I'm going to take the kids." Fantastic. They should meet him. He's a great American, an amazing man. I'm jealous. So, my wife waits with the kids and she introduces them and takes a picture. A friend of ours who was their helping staff says, "Congressman Lewis, you'll never guess who these are." And he says, "Who?" And he says, "These are Cesar Chavez's great-grandchildren." The civil rights and Chicano movements of the 1960s didn't always dovetail perfectly, for geographical and other reasons. As states pass laws diminishing voting rights and access, there's intense focus on disenfranchised African Americans. Are Hispanics and Latinos being left out of the conversation? I think that's a challenge. We're grouped together, but we're different, very culturally different. I think it's amazing and fantastic what Black Voters Matter is doing. I don't think that when they talk about black voters that they're only talking about black voters. I feel like it's not a competition. There's plenty of oppression to go around, whether it's voting rights, economic adversity, healthcare, education. There's no one issue that fits us. We are part of every issue. We want to try and break that down at this event August 28th. We are one. Even though my grandfather and Dr. King never got a chance to meet, this is a moment where I'd love to see Martin, and I use this as a fresh start. What happened in the past has happened, but it doesn't matter because if you take away our voting rights, we have nothing left to fight for. Let's go. We've got to leave it behind. We're going to start the barbecue. We're going to start the carne asada right away, and we want to work together. So, I really don't feel it's a competition as much as a chance to elevate each other. Talk about how the labor and voting rights movements are connected today. They've always been connected. Dr. King was civil rights leading, and when he passed away, he was organizing garbage workers in Tennessee, and my grandfather started organizing farm workers. Later, he got into, yes, labor, but then got into gay rights, which is now LGBTQ rights. He was huge into animal rights. He was huge into indigenous rights and co-ops. I think the men saw what they were doing on the other side. Dr. King saw the labor. My grandfather saw the civil, and unfortunately, Dr. King was taken away too soon. Growing up poor was a major motivator for your granddad in his work. What drives you? Just how we were raised. I don't know any different. The family always supported my grandfather very much, so I think I was 6 years old when I went first leafleting and putting flyers out, talk about Arizona. Give us the lay of the land as it pertains to Hispanics and Latinos voting rights. Arizona has a huge Latino population, a lot of it in Maricopa County. I've always thought Arizona would get more money spent on presidential campaigns, but no. So, a lot of this work has been without floods of resources. I'd go to Nevada and hear Jay-Z doing commercials for Obama. Then I'd be in Arizona and I would just hear the same standard commercial. Like, wait a minute, how are we not having some cool Latina, Chicano artist doing ads? We've seen in those last 10 years a concentrated effort on registering Latino voters, making sure they're on the vote-by-mail lists to fight any of the voter suppression tactics and antics, so that's a way to preempt it. They've been doing a lot of great work. I'm talking everybody on the ground, from the non-profits. The national groups have been setting up, really doing an amazing job. Latino voters are not just Spanish-speaking. Yes, you need Spanish-speaking ads to reach people, but a lot of it is policy, not just immigration. We care about other things, too. There's nothing worse than pandering. I'm a Latino voter, I stand up and ask a question and they want to turn everything into, well, if we deal with immigration. Yes, we need to deal with immigration, but that's not exclusively a Latino issue. There are Black people that enter. The community is hugely impacted. What about education for Latino communities in such and such zip codes? What about healthcare not being accessed? What about food apartheid? Food apartheid is a term I'm using for food deserts. Your grandfather caught blowback for the perception he directed more energy toward Mexican Americans than guest or undocumented workers. What would he think of immigration policy today and the debate surrounding it? My grandfather wasn't against immigration like they try to make it sound. He was against scabs, he was against union busting. There's a big difference. Had you been bringing those people from another state to union bust, he would have been against them. He was even more against using our own culture against us and using the challenges and struggles our brothers and sisters had in their country to pit against us. The narrative has to be very straight. He was against scabs in any way. Then, we remember in 1986, he played a huge role in pushing a Republican president at the time to pass the largest amnesty our country's ever seen. What was it, 3 million, if he were alive? I like to believe he'd have played a huge role in 2006 to get senators on board to pass an immigration bill that would not have been perfect, but there'd be a lot less people worried today about their status than there are. I would take that right now. I think he would be leading the forefront in making sure we have an immigration process and policies that treat people fairly and humanely. I think he'd even be to the point where we need to allow immigrants who live in communities to vote just because they share resources. They pay taxes, too. Taxation without representation. My grandfather really understood this constitution thing, right? I think he would organizing labor, faith, community leaders to, yes, get arrested and civil disobedience. People would probably have to talk him out of fasting at this age. I think if he were alive, he'd be like, I'm going to fast. Whoa. You're 96 years old. You cannot be fasting like that again. I think he would be even more determined than ever to do it, and so I think he'd be right in the middle of the fight, leading the charge and supporting those on the ground doing the work. Viva la causa was a motto synonymous with your grandfather. What is La Causa today? La Causa is much bigger now. While we think of it as the Chicano movement and so forth, it's really not. You've heard Black Lives Matter stand up for immigrants and for Latinos. That's part of La Causa, right? We hear the LGBT community with the horrible stuff that happened in Orlando. We saw how the LGBT community came out to support not just the Latinos that were impacted, but the Latino community as a whole. That is part of La Causa. So, to me, La Causa never dies. It just grows, and the more we add to it, the stronger it gets.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.